Nick, good to see you. We're going to start with the $1 million question. Can I retire early? A recent survey of 2,000 retired Americans found that most expected to retire at 63.2 years old, but instead retired at 61 and a half. And one in three said they would have retired earlier if they'd had the chance, of course.
Yeah.
So, how much money do I need in the bank to retire early? Because I have seen a rule of thumb that says like 1 million and you're good.
Yeah, it's like what it was a Dr. Evil, $1 million. Well, $1 million isn't quite what it was
No.
back then. That study was crazy to me, that people expected to retire at 63, but actually instead retired earlier at 61 and a half. And I really think that had a lot to do with the pandemic. Just
Yes.
people saying, I'm
Right.
done.
Hmm.
I'm not going to do it. And, I'm not going to work. And now maybe that wasn't the best decision that they had. So, the question, how much do I need to retire? Is it $1 million? Is it more? It really depends on your lifestyle, the lifestyle that you've built up. I've seen people who are out of debt. They spend $3,000 a month in expenses. Their Social Security is $3,000 a month, and they're not really using their investments for much at all. So I've seen that happen. I've also seen the other side where people maybe have $7,000 of expenses, $3,000 of Social Security. There's a $4,000 gap. That's $48,000 a year. They don't have a pension. And now they need to get it into their retirement savings to be able to make ends meet. And what that means is they're taking withdrawals. Well, how much can you withdraw? There's a rule of thumb called the 4% rule.
Hmm.
What that means is studies were done years and years ago that if you want your money to last as long as you do, don't take out any more than 4%, and it should last as long as you do. Now, there's been Wall Street Journal said it's like 3%. There's been things, but 4% seems to be the going number that most people would say is a good rule of thumb. So if you have $1 million and 4% of that's $40,000, that's close to your $48,000 if that's what you were short. So that's just a good rule of thumb to use, but that's not the only rule of thumb because you got to factor in inflation too.
Oh my goodness. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So then what is the best way to figure out what will get me to and through retirement?
So a strategy that I use is called LIGA, Liga. So
Liga.
the L stands for lifestyle. It's the first thing that you got to figure out is what's my lifestyle going to cost? And this is usually the step that people skip over because they don't want to do it. They don't want to figure out what am I really spending, but it's the most important thing. This is how companies know if they can be successful by knowing what they spend. I think the only entity out there that doesn't think that they have to figure out what they spend is maybe the government. But I'll leave that to another whole
Yes.
conversation, right? So you got to know what your lifestyle expense is. That's the L, the lifestyle. The next letter is the I. That's the inflow. What's coming in? What streams of income are coming in? Social Security, pension, maybe rental, to help offset that lifestyle. So that's the I. And then what you have is the G. That's the gap. Well, if this is my lifestyle and this is my income coming in, what's that difference? What's that gap? And once you figure out what that gap is, now you got to go to your bucket of savings and say, is this going to support that? The A in assets. Is what I've saved going to help support my shortfall? And you've got to really get clarity on this, and you've got to run some simulations too. You got to
Right.
make sure it's going to last in good times and bad times. You just don't want to say, "Oh, I threw it on a spreadsheet. I made, inflation 0%, and I figured the stock market should average 11%."
Sounds quite nice.
Yeah, it sounds nice on paper, but in reality, look at 2022.
Right.
Was inflation 0? Nope. It was like 7, 8%. Was the stock market, up 11%? No. It was down 20. In some metrics, 30%. So
Mhm.
you got to use some real numbers.
Mhm. So, of course, if you retire early, you're no longer getting a paycheck. So, it may be tempting to claim Social Security early, but that could lead to a lifetime of reduced benefits.
Oh, that grid there. I mean, study this up and down because if you take it 62, you are getting a 30% haircut. You get 70% of your actual benefit. And your full benefits actually at 67. That's when you get 100% of your benefits. But every year that you wait past 67, it goes up by 8%. So you get even better benefits the longer you wait. And that's just, now, if you take it 62 and you get that 30% haircut, That's 30% this year, next year, and every year thereafter. And I
Right.
ran a chart. This is actually an example of somebody, and all these pages, this is actually all these different bubbles. This is all the different choices that they had for choosing Social Security. This is all just grids of options. Here's what I found was interesting. They said, well, hey, Nick, we just want to turn on Social Security at 62. And I said, okay, well, your lifetime benefits, if you live to be 95, is going to be about $1.6 million. And they said, that's great. I said, but if you maximize the strategy and don't take it at the earliest time, you could get over $2 million of benefits. And they said,
Wow.
hold on, 2 million instead of 1.6 million? That's Social Security maximization. In most cases, we're talking not tens of thousands. In some cases, we're talking, in a lot of cases, actually, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in additional benefits. And I'd rather take it out of their pocket than yours. And if government's coming out and saying, oh, well, we're going to cut benefits anyway in the future, they've actually come out and said we can pay 80% of benefits by 2034. That means they could reduce Social Security benefits by 20% in the future. So if you got a haircut now, you might even get a haircut later. And that's not a good way, because then it puts so much strain on the retirement savings.
Of
And so
course.
Social Security maximization is really key.
Right, right. So, last question would be about healthcare, because a lot of us rely on our employer for health insurance.
Right.
Medicare doesn't start until you're 65. So, let's say I want to retire at 60. What do I do for those 5 gap years?
And this I see a lot with people who they say, I'm going to retire early, and they just leave their job. And it's like in that first month, they're like, who's going to, oh, how much, where's my insurance coming from? Oh, well,
Cobra's
that
how
shouldn't,
much?
yeah. And then you have to go on Cobra.
Hmm.
And in Cobra is not cheap. I mean, we're talking
Hmm.
over $1,000 in most cases
Hmm.
for Cobra. And then what people will say is, well, then I'll get in on the health insurance marketplace if you qualify. And then what about, well, I'll just do private insurance, and that's costly. And more recently, what I've seen multiple times this month alone is people telling me, well, you know what, I retired, and I'll ask, well, what health insurance plan do you have right now? And they'll say, I actually don't have it.
Oh,
And you can't afford not to have it, even if it's so costly. And I get that. And I feel the pain because I can see that, but you just can't go without it. So this is one of the reasons why if you can, wait until after 65, because then you can go on Medicare after 65 and you don't have to worry about how am I going to pay for these health insurance bills, because
hmm,
that's probably
hmm.
the biggest expense that's not checked, not accounted for by most people when they just retire early.
Right. You can't fall into early retirement. You have to start planning now. It makes so much
Mhm.
sense, Nick. So, if somebody wants to see if they have their ducks in a row for an early retirement, how can they reach you with questions?
Well, the best way, go to our website, group10financial.com. On there, you'll have a link that you can set up a 15-minute virtual strategy session call, and we can check in and see, because that's the big question people have is, can I retire? When can I retire? And as basic as that question is, it's complicated. And so if we can demystify that and give you a date so that you know when you can become work optional, then that's going to help you immensely. And so
Hmm.
all people have to do is go to our website, group10financial.com.
All right, Nick, thank you.
Great being with you, Aaron.